The cracked view screen barely kept the dust out anymore. Commander Tresnaren stood stiffly, antennae low, shoulders slumped beneath the frayed edges of his uniform. He stared at the blackened horizon where another blast had just lit up the sky, a distant orange glow illuminating the skeletal remains of what used to be a residential dome. A fine powder of metal and soot drifted down from the ceiling, coating his already filthy coat. He didn't even bother to brush it off anymore. There was no point. None of this felt like it had a point anymore. He hadn't slept in 2 cycles. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a full meal. His command center, a once proud hub of military coordination for the Vidian Alliance, was now just a half-powered bunker with flickering lights and a dying power core. The walls vibrated every few minutes from the relentless orbital bombardment, and the floor tiles were starting to crack from the accumulated stress. Status report. He barked, trying to sound like a leader, though the rasp in his voice betrayed the weariness he could no longer hide. Lieutenant Farah Blaze, usually one of the most composed officers under his command, was frantically typing at a dim console with fingers that trembled more than she would ever admit. Her violet-hued skin was pale, almost gray, under the flickering emergency lights. "Not good, Commander," she replied, her voice thin and dry. 3 more domes have gone dark in the southern quadrant. We're losing contact faster than the system can process incoming data. Droxian dropships have landed in sectors 7 through 13. Casualty reports are coming in? She hesitated, her hands freezing above the interface. They're bad, sir. Real bad. Truzzy swore under his breath. It was a guttural, low-frequency Vidian curse, not polite for mixed company gatherings, but nobody cared about manners anymore. And our planetary defense grid, down to 17% capacity, and it's not holding. Droxians. They've tuned their cannons to interfere with our shield harmonics. It's like they know exactly what frequency ranges we're using. She let out a small, bitter laugh, one that didn't come from amusement, but from the kind of helpless despair that pushed even the strongest into grim absurdity. Almost like someone sold us out. That made Triz slam his fist against the nearest display screen. Sparks burst from the frame and everyone in the room jumped. "When I find who leaked our protocols," he growled, "I'll feed them to a Jovian acid slug slowly." Silence fell across the room. A dozen species, 26 individuals in total, pretended to be suddenly interested in anything but their commander's rising rage. Truz didn't blame them. The entire command staff, once the pride of the Vidian Defense Force, was now just a band of cornered prey in a cage rapidly shrinking around them. The Vidian Alliance had once been proud, a cornerstone of stability in the Orion Spur. They had maintained peace, brokered treaties, even helped weaker systems defend themselves against pirates and rogue AI factions. But now, they were reduced to running last stands from subterranean war rooms, desperately hoping for a miracle no one believed was coming. "Communications," Traz barked again, trying to wrest back control from the creeping hopelessness. "Any response to our distress signal?" Flick Rendar, the communications officer, a twitchy little prion with soft fur and darting eyes, shook his head with enough force that his translator pendant clinked against his chest. "Nothing from the Galactic Concord," he reported. "The Alien Federation says they are, quote, deeply concerned, but not enough to lift a finger. The Aussie Confederacy insists their battle fleet is undergoing scheduled maintenance. All 11,000 ships," Tra snapped. Flick shrugged helplessly. Apparently, of course. The moment things got truly dangerous, the other powers ran for cover. The Concord would argue. The aliens would delay. The Aussies would lie. Everyone would find a reason to stay away while the Vidian Alliance was systematically disassembled by the Droyan Empire. "What about Earth?" Traz asked without looking at anyone, his voice quieter now. "Did we get anything from the humans?" The question sucked the oxygen out of the room. Blaze glanced around nervously. "The humans?" she repeated softly, as if saying the name too loudly might summon them. A wave of murmurs, clicks, and uneasy body language rippled through the command center. The very idea of contacting Earth seemed to make some of the officers visibly uncomfortable. "Admiral Vox?" Traz asked. The old warrior, who had until now stood silently in the corner, finally moved. His voice was low, gruff, weathered like ancient stone. "You want to involve the humans?" he asked, almost like a challenge. "You've heard the stories. You know what they are." Blaz nodded slowly. "Their Reaper fleet once turned an entire moon to rubble because someone insulted the Admiral's hat. And their idea of diplomacy," Vox continued, is showing up to peace negotiations with weapons bigger than the transport ship. They're unpredictable, Plick added. Chaotic. Dangerous. We can't trust them. Traz closed his eyes and exhaled. We sent the distress signal to every system in range, including Earth. But let's be honest, no one is coming, especially not the humans. They haven't responded to any interstellar communications in over 3 solar cycles. The room was silent. Even the humming of failing lights and the distant rumbles from outside seemed to pause. Then the next explosion hit much closer this time. The entire bunker shook. Monitors sparked and groaned, and someone screamed as part of the ceiling caved in near the eastern wall. The lights flickered, then steadied again on backup power. Trez reached for his ceremonial blade. It wasn't sharp, it wasn't tactical, but it was tradition. If this was going to be their last stand, then he would die with honor, or what little was left of it. He looked around the room at his tired officers, at the dust, the fear, the utter desolation, and chuckled bitterly. Well, he muttered, I always hoped my death would be a little more dignified. Guess I'll have to settle for going up buried in rubble, no one replied. Because no one believed they were making it out. The worst part wasn't the bombardments. It wasn't even the betrayal by their allies. It was the silence. The silence after the distress signal went out. The waiting. The complete absence of hope. If this was how their civilization ended, cornered, cut off, forgotten, then so be it. Truz had made peace with that. He just wished someone had cared. Even the humans, even those terrifying, barbaric, unpredictable humans, but they hadn't come. And deep down, that hurt the most. The command center had settled into a numb routine of hopelessness. Outside, the relentless Droyan bombardment had slowed for the first time in days, but nobody dared believe it was over. That kind of silence was often more terrifying than the sound of explosions. It meant the enemy was preparing something worse. Inside, everyone moved like shadows, tired of pretending they still believed reinforcements were coming. The emergency lighting cast the bunker in a dim orange glow, highlighting the deep cracks in the walls and the exhaustion carved into every face. No one had changed uniforms in days. Some had stopped wearing them altogether, trading ruined ceremonial coats for practical utility gear scavenged from destroyed storage rooms. What once was a place of strategy and control now felt like the inside of a tomb. Ambassador Lorik Krell, ever the self-important diplomat even at the edge of death, paced irritably across the narrow length of the bunker, tugging at his ornate collar. His scaly feet clicked on the metal floor with each step. This quiet is maddening, he muttered. You'd think the Droyans would just finish the job already. Admiral Vox, seated at a cracked tactical station, grunted without looking up. You could help by sitting down and not wearing out the floor plating. Krell sniffed. Pacing helps me think. Helps me strategize. Strategize our surrender, you mean? Commander Traz muttered from behind a half-dead console, rubbing the bridge of his nose. That is, after all, what you were sent here to do. When the enemy breaches our last walls, and they will, I'll be the one speaking for all of us, Krell said stiffly. And I will do it with dignity. Even if the only thing I can offer them is the proper placement of my severed head in their trophy hall. Lieutenant Farablas let out a laugh that cracked somewhere between a snort and a sob. You're assuming the Droyans care about dignity? I'm assuming, Krell replied with a dramatic sigh, that if I'm going to die horribly, I should at least look good doing it. That was the last thing anyone said before the console in front of Communications Officer Plick Rendar lit up with a sudden burst of activity. The Prion's twitchy ears stood straight up. Wait, I'm picking up something, he shouted, half standing from his seat. Something big, long-range scanners show multiple objects entering the system. Everyone turned toward him at once. Vox rose from his seat. Traz practically jumped over Krell's pacing path to get to the console. What kind of objects? Plick's paws scramble across the controls. It doesn't make sense. The velocity readings these things are moving faster than anything I've ever seen. Not even Droyan warships move like this, Krell scoffed. Probably a sensor glitch, or maybe we're all hallucinating from stress and starvation. This is how it ends. With false hope? No, Plick barked, pointing at the readings. I'm seeing real mass-confirmed ships. Dozens of them. They're broadcasting on. He froze. What? Vox demanded. On what frequency? Plick slowly turned to look at them, his eyes wide. Human frequencies. It was like someone had turned off gravity. The entire room went still, silence. Then someone dropped a datapad. The clatter echoed like thunder. Blaz's skin went visibly pale, shifting from violet to a sickly lavender. "Humans?" she whispered. Krell stumbled backward into a chair. "That's impossible." They didn't respond. For 3 solar cycles, nothing. "We tried everything: direct messages, diplomatic channels, even a personal appeal from the Concord." "Well, apparently," Plick muttered, still staring at the screen. "They got the message." Trez's mind was racing. He had read the old dossiers, heard the whispers. Earth, when it had finally emerged as a spacefaring power, had been nothing but unpredictable. Half the galaxy avoided them out of fear. The other half pretended Earth didn't exist. No one truly understood how the humans operated, only that they fought like monsters and negotiated like lunatics. "What kind of ships?" Trez asked. "The scans were still processing." "Massive," Plick replied. "And they're spreading out information. Not random. This is organized. Military." Blaz took a cautious step forward, glancing nervously at Trez. "Sir, is it possible?" Trez didn't answer. His throat felt tight. Before anyone could speak again, the main view screen flickered on, unprompted, practically glow. Her hair was tied back in tight braids. Her eyes sharp, commanding, took in everything. "This is Admiral Morgan Walsh of the Earth Reaper Fleet," she said calmly. "We received your distress call. Sorry we're late. We stopped to pick up some party favors." Behind her, several crew members moved to reveal missile racks the size of buildings. The silence in the Vidian command center was palpable. Krell fainted. No one helped him. Trees stared at the screen like he was seeing a ghost. "Admiral, you actually came?" Walsh smirked. "You look terrible, Commander. How long have the Droians been bombarding you?" Admiral Vox stepped forward, his voice strong despite everything. 17 cycles. They began with the colonies. Where are what's left?" Walsh turned away from the screen. "Tactical, give me full planetary scans. Medical, prep relief drops. And someone wake up Captain Chen. We've got some bunker busters with his name on them." When she faced the screen again, her expression was sharp, but not unkind. "The cavalry has arrived, Commander Nerin. Now get me access to your defense grid, what's left of it. And tell me where's their biggest ship." Blaz raised her hand slowly. "The Dreadnought Eclipse. 30 kilometers long. Planet cracker beams. We haven't scratched it." A slow smile spread across Walsh's face. "Perfect. I've been dying to try our new quantum torpedoes. Congress nearly had a collective aneurysm approving them." Krell groaned from the floor. "Please tell me I dreamed this." Walsh looked down at him. "Oh good, the diplomat's awake." "Don't worry, we'll make sure your skull stays intact." Krell blinked. Thank you." Walsh gave him a shark-like grin. Charmed. Tozi, still trying to process what was happening, took a deep breath. "You're really here." Walsh gave a short nod. "You called. We answered." That's what friends do. It wasn't just the shock of their arrival. It was the disbelief that someone as feared and unpredictable as the humans had heard their plea and come anyway. Despite their reputation, despite the danger, despite the silence from everyone else, Earth had come. And as Commander Trez looked out at the screen filled with monstrous warships from a world no one truly understood, he realized something deep in his bones. The galaxy was about to change, and the Droians had no idea what was coming. The atmosphere inside the Vidian command center had shifted from hopeless to something far stranger: raw, silent awe. After cycles of defeat, silence, and the slow collapse of an entire civilization, the room was filled with people standing so still they barely remembered to breathe. Every screen now displayed the same image: a fleet that defied reason. The human ships hadn't just arrived, they had arrived, boldly, unapologetically, with the confidence of a force that didn't just expect victory but treated it like a foregone conclusion. Their formation spanned across the upper stratosphere, stretching from orbit in a broad net around the planet. It wasn't a traditional formation like the disciplined triangles of the Vidian Defense Force or the sleek V-shapes of the Alien Navy. No, this was something else. It was wild, asymmetric, brutal, and still, it worked. "Look at their positioning," Admiral Vox murmured, squinting at the tactical display. "It looks like chaos, but it's not. It's controlled chaos." The lead vessel, the HS Harbinger, was still front and center, a monstrosity of raw metal and glowing red engines, hovering like a predator above a wounded animal. Its hull looked like it had been torn straight from the belly of a mining asteroid and welded together with sheer spite and an unlimited weapons budget. Gun turrets lined every surface. There were launch bays and glowing ports pulsing with energy that didn't match any known configuration. The ship radiated the message, "I dare you to fire first." And behind it came the others 24 ships, each one seemingly more absurd than the last. Some were long and angular, like floating swords bristling with weapons from tip to tail. Others were wide, blunt, and slow, with jagged armor plating that looked salvaged from ancient battlefield wrecks. One ship resembled a flying iron cathedral, its engines glowing a soft gold beneath towering spires and Gothic arches. Another looked more like a floating junkyard that had spontaneously become sentient and decided to wage war. None of them followed standard galactic design. No symmetry. No elegance. Just power, raw, ugly, magnificent power. Lieutenant Blas stepped forward, her eyes wide and unblinking. Are those skeletons painted on the hull of that destroyer?" Technically, Ambassador Krell replied, regaining his voice for the first time since his dramatic fainting spell. "Those are stylized calcium structures representing a cultural figure called the Grim Reaper." Blas turned slowly. "They paint death on their ships." "Yes," Krell said dryly. "Because of course they do." Trazi stared at the fleet, barely able to believe what he was seeing. These weren't just warships. They were statements, messages, symbols, warning. Each one screamed the same thing. "Don't start a fight with us. You'll regret it." Admiral Vox leaned forward. "Look at their deployment. They're not just hovering, they're preparing for engagement." As if on cue, the human ships began to fan out, covering key orbitals. Fighters launched from carrier bays, dispersing in sharp, predatory swarms. Gunships aligned themselves along invisible vectors, adjusting their orbits with the ease of ships that had done this a hunt. "Incoming transmission," Communications Officer Plick said, snapping everyone's attention back to the view screen. "They're opening visuals from the Harbinger." The screen shifted again, and this time, the command staff got their first real look at the human in charge. Admiral Morgan Walsh stood at the center of her bridge, a strange combination of regal poise and battlefield grit. Her white uniform was lined with metals that glittered under dim lighting. Her posture was perfectly straight, her arms behind her back, and her dark eyes locked onto the Vidian display with calm intensity. "Apologies for the delay," she said, her voice rich, confident, and strangely musical. "We had to stop to pick up some party favors." She motioned to the side, and the view briefly panned across her bridge. Several dozen missiles, each larger than a small Vidian fighter, were being loaded into racks. A crewman gave the camera a casual wave. Commander Trez's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like someone had just dropped a deity into his living room. "This is Admiral Morgan Walsh of Earth's Reaper Fleet," she continued. "We received your distress call. We're here to help." It was the most understated declaration of power the Vidians had ever heard, and it terrified them more than any Droyan threat ever had. Ambassador Krell, now sitting upright but visibly shaking, whispered, "You brought the Reapers." Walsh smirked. "You say that like it's a bad thing." Krell swallowed. They're a myth. You're a myth. Your fleet supposedly destroyed a pirate moon for insulting a commander's hat. That was Admiral O'Reilly, she replied. And it was a very nice hat. Humans don't send the Reaper fleet unless the situation is catastrophic, Vox said slowly. Why would they send you now? Walsh's eyes narrowed slightly. Because we don't abandon allies. She turned and barked orders to someone off-screen. Tactical, begin full scan of Droyan battle positions. Medical teams prepare for ground support deployment. And someone wake Captain Chen, he's been itching to try those new bunker busters. When she turned back, her expression softened. Now, Commander Naren, I'm going to need access to your defense grid, what's left of it, and I want a priority target. Biggest, baddest Droyan ship in the sector. Lieutenant Blas hesitated, then answered. That would be the Dreadnought Eclipse. It's 30 kilometers long, Planet Cracker class, with regenerative shielding. We've thrown everything at it. Nothing worked. Walsh smiled, not a friendly smile, not a diplomatic one. The kind of smile you saw just before a predator struck. Perfect. Been looking for a proper target to test our quantum torpedoes. Krell blinked rapidly. Quantum torpedoes. They're so expensive our Congress nearly fainted approving them, she said. But don't worry. You're getting your money's worth. Vox couldn't hide the grin creeping across his tired face. What's your plan, Admiral? Walsh folded her arms. Simple. We're going to tear their fleet apart from the inside out. You just sit tight and enjoy the show. Before anyone could ask another question, the command center screens erupted with movement. Dozens of human fighters burst from the carriers, screaming through the upper atmosphere. Gunships launched missile salvos that carved long, burning trails through space, and from the belly of the Harbinger, hundreds of dark cylindrical objects began to fall. "What are those?" Blaz asked, pointing. Admiral Vox leaned in closer. "Orbital drop pods. Those are obsolete," Krell protested. "No civilized species uses drop pods anymore," the speakers crackled. "Fatality rate is acceptable," came Walsh's voice. "Keeps the soldiers motivated." A beat passed. "Just kidding. It's more like a 98% survival rate these days. The other 2% get very impressive funerals." The room didn't know whether to laugh or panic. Commander Trees looked at the screens as the pods hit atmosphere. Each one carried a human soldier in full-powered armor, plummeting toward the battlefield with the force of a meteor. The shockwaves from their landings registered on the seismic sensors in real time. "No one fights like this," Trees whispered. "No one drops from orbit in single-person death tubes." "They do," Vox said. "And they're good at it." More screens lit up, showing ground-level views as the Reaper ground forces engaged the Droyan infantry. Human units moved fast with unnatural coordination. Their weapons weren't just destructive. They were cruelly efficient, cutting through enemy ranks like a knife through soft armor. Drones flew overhead, feeding data into the fleet's strike systems. Orbital fire rained down with pinpoint precision, carving corridors through enemy positions before the troops even arrived. "Look at them," Krell said weakly. "It's not a war, it's a performance. War is art," Walsh's voice came again through the speakers. "And we're artists." The HS Harbinger moved again, silently gliding across the void like a predator circling in for the kill. Hidden until now behind the Vidian moon, it revealed a massive launcher at its bow. "Fire the Kraken," Walsh ordered. A single torpedo large enough to be mistaken for a shuttle launched. Blue-white energy tendrils rippled behind it as it arced silently toward the Dreadnought Eclipse. What is that?" Tries asked, staring at the live feed. Captain Shen appeared on a side screen, grinning like a lunatic. "We call it the Kraken. Technically, it's a quantum-entangled, multi-phase torpedo with a compressed dark matter core. English, please," Blaze muttered. "It's a really big boom," Shen said cheerfully, in a really small package. The torpedo struck the Droyan flagship just as its planet cracker beam was about to fire. For a second, nothing happened. Then the ship folded in on itself. It collapsed like a dying star, twisting with impossible geometries before exploding outward in a blinding burst of blue light. The detonation momentarily outshone the Vidian sun. Bullseye. Captain Chen casually popped a piece of candy into his mouth. Next. The entire Vidian command center was silent, and then, slowly inevitably, Traz began to smile. Because for the first time in weeks, maybe months, they had a chance, and it was all because of them. The humans. The initial shock of the humans' arrival had not yet worn off when the first wave of devastation hit the Droyans. The command center's massive screen, still dust-covered and cracked from earlier bombardments, was now filled with real-time footage streaming from dozens of human recon drones and combat satellites. The feed was chaotic, jarring, constantly shifting from orbit to ground, but one thing was clear: the Reaper fleet had not come to negotiate. They had come to make war, and they were terrifyingly good at it. From the upper atmosphere, the HS Harbinger loomed like an omen, its angular silhouette casting long shadows over the scorched planet below. Dozens of smaller human ships flanked it, forming a defensive cordon that made it seem like the entire sky had become an armory. But what struck the Vidian officers most wasn't just the number of ships, it was how they moved. Every vessel, no matter the size or shape, seemed to dance through space. It wasn't the rigid formations most fleets preferred. It was something else, like watching an orchestra composed entirely of wolves. They struck hard and without warning. One moment, a cluster of Droyan ships was maneuvering over Sector 12. The next, they were being torn apart by coordinated blasts from 3 human destroyers that had warped into position from behind the Vidian moon. The engagement lasted 17 seconds. Debris scattered like snowflakes through the vacuum. Lieutenant Blas leaned over the tactical console. Stunned, they predicted the Droyan pattern and warped behind them mid-battle. "They used our own moons for cover," Admiral Vox added. "That's brilliant." Commander Trees just stared at the screen, unable to look away. "No. That's insane." A second later, a swarm of human interceptors broke the atmosphere, diving into the atmosphere like falling stars. Each one trailed a plasma exhaust that shimmered in the dusky sky, arcing toward Droyan ground positions. From the feed, they could see Droyan anti-air fire lighting up the sky in desperation. But the human craft danced between the bursts like they didn't care about the rules of physics. Some rolled sideways between flake rounds, others corkscrewed just enough to dodge plasma bolts mid-dive. Their pilots weren't just skilled, they were fearless. The feed from a recon drone cut to the battlefield below, showing the first wave of orbital drop troops landing in the devastated city outskirts. Vidian soldiers, outnumbered and exhausted, had taken cover behind shattered ruins, hoping for some kind of miracle. They got something better. A human drop pod smashed into the earth like a meteorite, sending dirt and ash flying in all directions. The shell popped open with a hiss of steam, and out stepped a human soldier clad head to toe in a bulky, jet-black exosuit that pulsed with blue energy. The armor didn't look mass-produced. It looked custom-built, personal, like it had been forged in fire for the express purpose of waging war. The soldier raised a large weapon that looked more like a siege cannon than a rifle. One blast vaporized an entire Droyan turret. Seconds later, more pods slammed into the ground nearby and more soldiers emerged, each carrying heavy armaments and moving with terrifying precision. "They're everywhere," Krell muttered from his corner, watching the screens in disbelief. Those are shock troops. They're using orbital shock troops." "Of course they are," Blaze whispered. "Because why wouldn't they?" Captain Chen's voice crackled over the comms. "Harbinger to all drop teams permission granted to deploy heavy payloads. Begin sector purge protocols." Traz sat upright. Sector purge. The screen split again, this time showing a ground-based feed from Sector 9, where a battalion of Droyan walkers had been advancing on a civilian shelter. A pair of human gunships screamed over the horizon, trailing smoke and missiles. Without slowing down, they opened fire, dropping bunker-busting bombs that cracked the earth open like glass. One of the walkers tried to fire back, but a human drone intercepted the shot, detonating midair and shielding the drop troops behind it. Then came the infantry, not in neat, organized lines, but as a fast-moving wave of chaos and firepower. They used terrain, rubble, even broken vehicles as cover. They flanked Droyan squads, cleared bunkers, and marked coordinates for precision orbital strikes. Tactical coordination between ground, air, and orbital units was near instantaneous. "They're fighting like they've done this 1,000 times, Blaz said, astonished. "They probably have," Vox replied grimly, "but it wasn't just efficiency that made the human assault so shocking. It was their total disregard for convention. While most galactic militaries prided themselves on protocol and honor-based engagements, the humans simply didn't play by those rules. They used dirty tactics, drones disguised as debris, decoy pods, sensor jammers that mimicked Droyan command signals. They would pretend to retreat, only to ambush from higher ground minutes later. It was war at its ugliest, and its most effective." The command center lit up again, this time showing a Droyan dreadnought retreating into high orbit. It had taken heavy damage and was trying to break free of the combat zone. The HS Valkyrie, Captain Chen's ship, gave chase. On screen, the Valkyrie launched a single weapon, a micro-singularity torpedo. It hit the Droyan ship mid-hull. For a moment, everything went still. Then the ship folded inward, compressed into a space smaller than a cargo crate before vanishing into a burst of warped energy. Krill winced. "That's a war crime on half the galactic charts. They call it innovation," Vox said. Another screen flashed with a new angle, this one showing the infamous Draden Eclipse, the flagship of the Droyan fleet. It hovered above their capital city, charging its main weapon. The energy gathering around its core pulsed with deadly green light, building toward a full-scale planetary blast. Plick's console lit up. "They're targeting the Vidian capital." Krell stumbled to his feet. "We have to evacuate." "No time," Blaz said, panic rising in her voice. "They're 5 seconds from firing." Then, without warning, the Harbinger uncloaked behind the Eclipse. "Ow!" Plick shouted. "That thing is 5 kilometers long." "How did it sneak up behind them?" "Stealth systems," Vox guessed. "No," Traz said. "That's not stealth. That's audacity." Admiral Walsh's voice came through smooth as silk. "Fire the Kraken." What followed couldn't be described as a missile. It was an event. The torpedo launched from the Harbinger's bow and trailed glowing blue energy that licked out in tendrils like something alive. It moved slowly at first, almost lazily, then accelerated at a speed that broke tracking algorithms. It struck the Eclipse just as its weapon charged to critical. The resulting explosion wasn't just loud, it was existential. The massive Droyan ship collapsed into itself, twisted in upon dimensions no one fully understood, and then erupted in a multicolored shockwave that turned the sky above the capital city into a blinding light show. The planet's magnetic field wobbled for a full minute. Afterward, every Droyan ship still fighting paused for a beat, and then, almost as one, they began to retreat. Krell sat down hard, his scales dimming with stunned relief. "They're running. Of course they are," Traz muttered. "They just watched their godship get eaten." The human ships didn't stop. They pressed forward, intercepting fleeing vessels, disabling warp drives with precision shots, and launching imp strikes to neutralize escape pods. It wasn't revenge. It was surgical, clinical, clean. And then, almost as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The Droyan fleet, once unstoppable, was in full retreat. The humans had flipped the entire war in less than a day. Smoke still clung to the skies above the Vidian capital as the sun began to set. The once bustling city, reduced now to piles of rubble and flickering infrastructure, bore witness to both utter devastation and the first hints of rebirth. And at the center of that slow, uncertain transformation was something none of them could have predicted: humanity. Commander Traz Nerin sat on what remained of a monument, its toppled stone base cracked and half buried under broken glass and ash. The statue it had supported had once honored the founding of the Vidian Alliance. Now, it was just debris. But for the first time in weeks, he wasn't thinking about death. He was alive. Laz was alive. Vox was alive. Most of his people were, miraculously, alive. Thanks to them, the humans' footsteps crunched over the rubble. Traz looked up to see Admiral Morgan Walsh standing in front of him, her white uniform somehow still pristine despite the battle he had watched her personally lead. She held out a metal flask. "I'm not sure if it's compatible with your biology," she said casually. "But if it kills you, at least it won't be a Droyan weapon that does it." Traz let out a short, surprised laugh. A real one. It sounded foreign to his own ears. He accepted the flask and sniffed the contents. The scent was sharp like fuel, and fire had gone dancing in a bottle. He took a cautious sip and nearly choked as it scorched a path down his 3 digestive tracts. "By the void," he wheezed. What is this?" "Tennessee whiskey," Walsh said proudly, dropping onto the stone next to him with none of the ceremony Vidian officers were trained to maintain. "Made it myself, on my family farm." Between deployments, Traz coughed once more, then took another sip. "It tastes like something that should be regulated as a weapon." "Yeah," she grinned. "That's why we bring it to peace treaties." They sat in silence for a moment. Around them, human medics worked side by side with Vidian doctors, tending to the wounded. Enormous Earth-made drop ships delivered food and emergency supplies with precision that bordered on miraculous efficiency. Vidian children who'd seen far too much watched wide-eyed as human engineers repaired broken water systems with handheld tools that beeped and hummed like miniature miracles. Overhead, human fighters flew lazy patrols, occasionally streaking across the twilight sky in sharp lines of blue light. The war might be over, but the humans weren't taking any chances. And neither were the Vidians. Not anymore. "You came," Traz said finally, turning to look at Walsh. Everyone else ran. "But you came." Walsh took a long swig from her flask and handed it back. "You called. That's what friends do?" He stared at her. "Are we friends?" She looked back at him, expression unreadable. "We are now." Traz tilted his head slightly. "But why? You don't know us. We're not part of your alliances. We're not even a major power anymore. Doesn't matter," she said. "You asked for help, and we don't ignore that. Not ever." He frowned. "But everyone said you were dangerous, unpredictable. That humans fight too hard, care too little, joke at the wrong times. Krell was convinced you'd eat our young." She laughed, sharp and sudden. "Too stringy." Traz flinched. "Kidding," she added. "Mostly." He shook his head. "That's what I don't understand. You just fought one of the deadliest wars we've seen in centuries, and now you're making jokes." "That's because we're alive," she said simply. "And that matters." Traz didn't respond. He just stared out at the broken skyline, watching a group of human soldiers laugh with Vidian civilians around a makeshift fire. One of the humans was using a piece of destroyed Droyan armor as a drum. Another strummed a strange string instrument made from salvaged wiring and scrap metal. Somehow it still made music. "They're celebrating," he said quietly. "Hours after combat ended, surrounded by the dead, and they're playing music." Walsh nodded. "Of course they are. That's humanity." He turned to her, puzzled. "We fight like hell," she said, "but we celebrate harder, because we've learned the hard way that life doesn't promise anything. Every second we get is a gift. You think war made us reckless? It didn't. It made us grateful." Traze fell silent. He watched as Ambassador Krell, who had spent the last several weeks nearly paralyzed by terror, was now in the middle of the gathering, attempting to mimic a human dance move. His long limbs flailed awkwardly, completely out of rhythm, but the humans cheered him on anyway. No one laughed maliciously. It was all joy, real, uninhibited joy. Krell's scales had shifted to a vivid blue, the color of hope. Trees smiled without meaning to. "I never thought I'd see that," he admitted. Krell, smiling, Walsh smirked. "He's probably already negotiating trade deals with our guys." "Probably," Trace agreed. Walsh leaned back against the stone and looked up at the stars. "You know," she said, "my great-grandmother used to say that humans live so vibrantly because we're always aware of how fragile everything is. Peace, life, connections. We know how fast it can all disappear." Trees tilted his head. "So, you fight to protect it?" She nodded. "We don't always get it right. We've made more than our share of mistakes. But we've learned, and when we care about someone, really care, we go all in. That's just who we are." Blaze appeared at that moment, her usual stiffness replaced by something more relaxed. She saluted them both formally, but then dropped the gesture quickly, as if realizing it didn't matter anymore. "Commander, Admiral," she said, "we have updated casualty numbers. Final report." Traze stood to meet her. "Go ahead. We lost approximately 12% of our remaining military forces," she said quietly. "Less than 5% of civilians in direct combat zones." Traze blinked. That's impossible. The Droians outnumbered us, outgunned us. We were days from being wiped out." Walsh shrugged and took the flask back from him. "Superior tech only gets you so far. What really wins wars? Understanding your enemy, their tactics, their psychology." Blaz nodded. "The Droians rely on fear. They expect people to give up. But the humans, you never stopped pushing forward, even when outnumbered." Vox appeared behind them, his arm in a regenerative sling and his uniform replaced with a loose medical wrap. "Sometimes the best defense is confusion," he said. "If your opponent hesitates just once, you win. That's the human way," Walsh replied. "Be so unpredictable that fear becomes their enemy, not you." Across the plaza, a human soldier was teaching a Vidian child how to juggle with 3 shiny fragments of polished debris. Around them, laughter echoed. Real laughter. Not the desperate kind they'd use to keep from crying during the worst nights, but the kind that came from something real. Something healing. Trees watched it all unfold and felt something strange rising in his chest. It wasn't just relief. It was something warmer, something more enduring. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, these strange, terrifying humans were exactly what the galaxy needed. Not conquerors, not caretakers, but partners, allies, friends. He turned to Walsh and raised the flask. 2 unexpected friends. She grinned and clinked her own flask against his. And to terrifyingly good whiskey. 6 lunar cycles had passed since the battle that changed everything. The Vidian capital had been rebuilt, not fully, not yet, but enough to stand proud. The skyline, once shattered by Droian bombardment, now held towers again. Some were new, shaped by human engineering and Vidian artistry. Others were old structures reforged from the bones of ruins, standing as monuments to resilience. There was still damage, yes. There were still scars, but there was also movement, music, life. And today, for the first time in its long history, the Grand Diplomatic Hall of the Vidian Alliance buzzed with something it had never hosted before. Unity. Representatives from 27 different species filled the chamber. The occasion? The formal signing of the Earth-Vidian Mutual Defense Pact, a treaty that would officially link humanity to the wider galactic community, not just as a rogue military power, but as an ally, a protector, and perhaps most surprisingly, a friend. At the center of the ornate platform stood Lorik Krell, newly promoted to senior ambassador and draped in ceremonial regalia that gleamed under the soft lighting. His once impractical collar now carried subtle nods to human culture, bronze medallions in the shape of Terran military insignias and a sash dyed in earth blue. Gone was the jittery diplomat who had once fainted at the mention of the Reaper fleet. In his place stood a man of presence and pride, a voice that carried authority and a heart that had found its courage. He stepped forward and looked across the sea of faces, some scaled, some feathered, some furred or crystalline or chitinous, and began. "Distinguished delegates," he said, his voice strong and clear, "today marks not only a new chapter in the history of the Vidian Alliance, but a turning point for galactic politics itself." He paused for emphasis. All eyes were on him. "For too long, many of us, myself included, feared the humans," he continued. "We feared their unpredictability. We misunderstood their culture, their passion, their fire. We called them barbarians, warmongers, reckless." He turned to glance at the front row, where Admiral Morgan Walsh and Captain Rick Chen sat side by side, both dressed in full dress uniform. Walsh's face carried its usual quiet intensity, but there was a flicker of warmth in her eyes. Chen was chewing gum. "And yet," Krull continued, "when the Droyan Empire threatened to extinguish our very existence, it was not the Galactic Concord who answered. Not the Elian Federation, nor the Uzzy Confederacy. It was Earth. It was the humans." The room burst into applause, some loud, others a soft resonance or rhythmic pulse, depending on physiology. But the meaning was universal. Appreciation, respect, gratitude. Commander now General Truss Nurin sat off to one side with Admiral Vox and Lieutenant Blas. All three wore formal attire, though theirs bore fresh embroidery. Silver trim patterned after Earth's planetary rings and black starbursts representing their first joint campaign. "You know," Vox leaned over and whispered, "Krell's gone from fearing the humans to practically worshipping them." Trezy gave a quiet laugh. "Typical politician. But he's not wrong. Indeed, much had changed in the months since the war. Word of the Droyans' defeat at human hands had spread like plasma fire across the quadrant. Their empire, once feared beyond reason, had retreated from 3 contested systems without a fight. Several former Droyan allies had turned on them, suddenly emboldened by tales of human fury and tactical brilliance. And the Uzzy Confederacy, which once claimed its entire fleet was under maintenance, had miraculously completed repairs ahead of schedule and now eagerly requested admission into the new defense alliance. At the far end of the hall, a crystalline ambassador from the Uzzy delegation rose. "The Uzzy Confederacy formally apologizes," the ambassador stated, its voice musical, like wind over glass, "for our unavailability during your time of need. We were reevaluating priorities. We would now be honored to join this partnership of strength and mutual defense." Krell raised a brow. Funny how the scent of victory seems to clear diplomatic calendars. A ripple of laughter swept through the crowd. Even Walsh smiled. The signing ceremony began. Pens glided across smart pads. Seals were pressed into virtual documents. Flags, some woven, some holographic, hung above the stage. A new era was dawning, but for Trees, it wasn't the paperwork or speeches that truly mattered. It was the change in tone. The way species that had once looked at Earth with suspicion now approached with admiration. The way human engineers worked beside Vidian architects to rebuild bridges and hospitals. The way soldiers from both worlds drilled together without needing translators because battle had taught them a shared language. Most of all, it was the way his people laughed again, sang again, danced. As the ceremony drew to a close, Krell raised a tall glass of golden liquid, Tennessee whiskey, he declared proudly. Now considered a delicacy across 3 systems. The crowd chuckled. "To our human allies," he said. "May their enemies tremble, and may we never again underestimate the species that turns war into an art form, and peace into a celebration." The toast was echoed across the hall in a dozen different languages and gestures. After the formalities, the gathering dissolved into mingling, conversation, and inevitably music. Somewhere near the plaza, a group of human Marines had set up makeshift instruments. Again, an Avidian choir had joined them. It wasn't beautiful, not by technical standards, but it was genuine. It was alive. Triz found himself once again standing beside Admiral Walsh. "You've changed the balance of power in this quadrant," he said quietly. "Was that your plan all along?" Walsh sipped from her glass, eyes scanning the crowd. Humans don't plan that far ahead, General. Then what do you plan? She turned to him, her smile the same sharp thing it had always been, half daring, half promise. We show up, she said. That's the plan. The rest? The rest is just good storytelling. Trez nodded slowly. Then I hope we have more stories to tell. You will, she replied, because this isn't the end. It's just a beginning. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching a galaxy turn. Epilogue. A lesson from Earth. In the years that followed, the Earth-Vidian Pact would grow into something far bigger than a military agreement. It became a model, a blueprint for what cooperation could look like when differences were embraced rather than feared. More species joined, old rivalries thawed, former enemies sat at shared tables. And a war still loomed in distant corners of space. One thing had fundamentally changed. No one ignored a distress signal anymore. Because the galaxy had learned a lesson. A very human lesson. That courage isn't just about having the biggest guns. It's about showing up. About fighting for someone who can't fight for themselves. About bringing whiskey to a war zone and music to a broken street. About standing between destruction and hope and choosing every single time to stand tall. Humanity was still dangerous. Still unpredictable. But they had shown the universe what it meant to be something more. To be fiercely loyal. To be wonderfully alive. To be the kind of ally who doesn't just save your life but reminds you why it's worth saving. And in a galaxy full of silence, fear, and retreat, Earth answered the call, every time.